In today's video, we're going to talk about something that I had to learn recently. And as I learned it, it really became a very positive experience for me. So much so that I want to share it with you. And this goes back to something that we talked about a little bit earlier, emotional generosity. If you recall, when we talked about emotional generosity, we were talking about giving people the benefit of the doubt and cutting them some slack. Well, today we're going to talk about taking that to the next level. And it's going to be all about our relationships. And it's no surprise that our relationships can have a lot to do with our level of happiness and our level of optimism and just how much we enjoy life. And I'm sure that as I said that, many of you were thinking about all of the bad relationships that you have, whether it's at work, whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in your other relationships with children, family, and so forth. But I want to define relationships a little bit more broadly. I want you to consider relationships that include anyone that you have an encounter with, whether it's a direct encounter like a bank teller or a server at a restaurant or even someone that you see on the freeway, or an indirect relationship, and that is where you are learning about a relationship through another person. And this happens all the time. You're talking with a friend and they're telling you a story about something that happened to them, and while you were not involved in that particular encounter, you can have some negative emotions associated with that story. So today I'm going to be talking about something very important that I call stop throwing people under the bus. And this is the way that it happened for me and how I learned this very valuable lesson. I had a client come to me recently and she was in the middle of a divorce. And I'm going to say it was a messy divorce because she had been married for 29 years and she had tried to leave her husband in the past but wasn't able to do that. And so now she was finally ready to leave her husband. And as she was describing her marriage to me, it was very clear that there was both physical and emotional abuse. And from my opinion, I believe that her ex-husband had bipolar tendencies. And so I really felt that divorcing was probably a wise thing to do. But as this client, and I'm going to call her Brenda, as Brenda was describing her relationship with me, as she was describing her husband to me, I was pretty surprised that she did not define herself as a victim. She did not place blame with herself or with her husband. It was a pretty matter-of-fact discussion about what happened in their marriage and why it could not work. And so as I was listening to her, I was pretty impressed with that because so many of my other clients in a similar situation would be describing themselves as a victim. They would be blaming their soon-to-be ex-husband for all of the terrible things that happened in their life. But Brenda wasn't doing that. And over the course of several sessions, I became even more impressed with what she didn't say over what she said. And it became very clear to me that she was not throwing her ex-husband or soon-to-be ex-husband under the bus. And I then had to look at my own life and consider how often I throw people under the bus. Because regardless of who it is, regardless of what has happened, when you throw someone under the bus, you are judging them. You are putting them down. You are defining yourself as a victim, regardless of what it is, something big or something small. And I found that most often I wasn't necessarily judging people out loud, but I was doing some silent judging and I was throwing people under the bus, whether it was someone who cut me off on the freeway, a server who did not, at a restaurant that didn't serve me well or something. I had some negative comments that I was sharing to myself. I was throwing them under the bus. When you throw someone under the bus, you create negative emotions. You cannot have positive emotions and negative emotions in the same moment. And so whatever you can do to lower those negative emotions, you're going to make room for more positive emotions. One of the ways to do that is to stop throwing people under the bus. And here's a way to do that. Most often, the people that make us mad, they really know how to push our buttons. They know exactly how to get us mad. And you could say, oh, so-and-so makes me so mad. Well, I hate to break it to you, but No one can make you mad. You allow them to make you mad. You allow yourself to get mad. Now that's easier said than done, I understand that. But I want you to consider that the majority of the time, the people that make us mad are not being as malicious as we think they are. They're not doing it on purpose as much as we think they are. And one of the ways to not throw them under the bus is to see them in their innocence instead of their guilt. To give them the benefit of the doubt. See, this is going back to emotional generosity, where you can actually look at them differently and understand that they might not have been as malicious or on purpose as you think. And when you can do that, you take that small amount of innocence and you use it to your benefit so that you don't get so angry, so mad, and have so many negative emotions. Now, I want to be very clear about something, that this does not take away their accountability. This does not mean they're not on the hook for what they've done. They are still accountable. They're still responsible for what they've done. This is about your emotions. This is about how you feel. And if you can raise your level of positive emotions, some miraculous things happen. You say you're sorry more often, you forgive faster, and you feel happier. Let me tell you about an experience that I had recently. I was applying to speak at a pretty large conference this summer. And it was a prestigious conference, and it would be worth a lot of money to me to be able to speak there, to be able to sell some of my products, books, audio programs, and so forth. And the application was done. And I had a very good chance of being accepted because I had spoken at this conference the year before. The one thing that I lacked was a letter of recommendation from a friend. And I had asked a friend, hey, this is very important to me. I need a letter of recommendation. It needs to say these things, and it has to be in by this date. Well, I received notice that I wasn't accepted to speak at this conference. I was devastated. I was hurt. I was offended, particularly when I found out the reason I was rejected is because my friend did not send in the letter of recommendation. I was so mad. I was ready to call him up and say, how could you do that to your friend? You knew that this was important to me. But yet, I had made a decision that I was going to stop throwing people under the bus. And by not throwing him under the bus, it allowed me to see it a little bit differently. Did it change the fact that I was rejected from the conference and I couldn't speak there? No, and I'm still upset about that. But I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and not throw him under the bus. And by not throwing him under the bus, when I finally spoke to him, I was able to talk to him in a more professional way, and I wasn't so angry. But the beauty of this is that it changed the way I felt. I was not upset. I was more willing to forgive. I was more willing to engage with this person because normally I would just avoid them. It is really important that you start to think about how often you throw people under the bus. And it's not easy, but this is something that is really within your control. And here's a couple things that you can do. Number one, see how often that you consider yourself a victim, how often you're judging another person, and how often you're throwing people under the bus. Number two, see them in their innocence instead of their guilt. For me, it has really come down to a constant reminder that when I start to feel upset, when I start to feel angry, I say to myself, you know what? I'm just not going to throw them under the bus. And it changes everything. Again, it doesn't mean they're off the hook, and it doesn't mean they're not accountable or responsible for what they have done. But I can tell you this, to the degree that you make an effort to stop throwing people under the bus, you are going to start to feel happier. You're going to be more optimistic. You're going to have more positive emotions. And I can guarantee you this. Those relationships that you thought about when we first started this video, those negative relationships, those relationships where people make you mad, those relationships are going to be better. They're going to be happier. They're going to create some great feelings, feelings that you probably long for, feelings that you probably need. So over this next week, Pay attention to how often you throw people under the bus, and don't throw them under the bus.